I still remember the smell of rain that morning, soft, clean, and calm, like any other day in Maplewood. It was a quiet little town where everyone knew each other, where you waved to your neighbors even if you didn't know their names. I'd lived there for 6 years. Nothing bad ever happened there. Or at least, that's what I used to tell myself. I had just poured my first cup of coffee when I noticed something stuck to my front door, a folded piece of paper, wet from the drizzle. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another delivery flyer. But something about the way it was tucked into the handle caught my eye. It looked deliberate. I opened it, and inside, in thick black marker, were 7 words that made my hands go cold. Get out of here if you want to live. I froze. At first, I thought it was a prank, some kid's sick joke. But then I noticed the handwriting. It was shaky. Urgent. The kind of handwriting you get when your hands are trembling. For a second, I just stood there, staring at those words, my heart pounding. The note didn't have a name or a signature. Just those words. I looked around the street, everything seemed normal. Cars parked, sprinklers running, someone walking their dog down the block. Then my eyes stopped on my next-door neighbor's house, Tom Henderson. Tom had lived next to me for about 2 years. Quiet guy, maybe mid-40s, worked in construction, always polite but distant. I hadn't seen him in a few days. But I remembered something strange. The night before, around midnight, I heard banging from his backyard. Not loud enough to call the cops, but odd enough to make me peek through my blinds. The lights were off, but I thought I saw someone moving in the shadows. Now, holding that note, I couldn't help but wonder, was it Tom who wrote it? Or was it meant for him? I stepped back inside and locked the door. My gut told me to leave, but my mind was still catching up. Maybe it's just some dumb prank, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. I picked up my phone and called my friend Lauren, who lived a few blocks away. I tried to sound casual. Hey, did anyone leave weird notes around your street this morning? She laughed. What kind of notes? I hesitated. Like, a warning. Something that says, get out if you want to live. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then she said quietly, No, Emily. Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer. Because deep down, I wasn't sure. Before hanging up, Lauren said, Listen, if you're freaked out, come stay here tonight. Just in case. I promised I'd think about it, but I didn't. I convinced myself it was nothing. At 11:20 that morning, I saw Tom's front door open. He stepped outside, wearing his usual gray hoodie, looking nervous. His eyes darted around before he caught sight of me through the window. Our eyes met for a second, and he froze. Then he mouthed something I'll never forget. Get out. I blinked. What? I whispered to myself. But before I could open the door, he turned around and slammed his own shut. 10 minutes later, everything changed. I didn't move for a while after that. I just stood by the window, staring at Tom's house, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe I misread his lips. Maybe he said something else. But deep down, I knew he hadn't. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy, thick, like the calm before a storm. I decided to distract myself, so I started cleaning. Dishes, laundry, anything to get my mind off that note. But no matter what I did, those words kept replaying in my head, get out of here if you want to live. At one point, I went to take out the trash and caught a glimpse of something strange, Tom's truck, parked half on the sidewalk, driver's door wide open. His keys were still in the ignition. That's when my gut screamed something's wrong. I slowly walked over to his driveway, calling out, Tom? You okay? No answer. The house looked still, lifeless. But when I got close enough, I noticed the side door, the one that led into his kitchen, was cracked open. I knocked. Tom? It's Emily. You dropped your keys. Nothing. I hesitated for a few seconds, then pushed the door open. The air inside smelled faintly of paint thinner and something metallic. I stepped in just far enough to see his kitchen table, papers everywhere, half-empty coffee mug, and a torn map of our neighborhood with circles drawn around certain houses, including mine. My breath caught. What was this? Why would Tom have a map like that? And then, out of nowhere, I heard movement upstairs. Slow, creaking footsteps. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I turned and ran out the back door, straight into my yard, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. I slammed my own door shut and locked it, then called 911. The dispatcher asked me to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. "There's someone in my neighbor's house," I said. "And he left a note on my door this morning telling me to leave." The dispatcher said officers were on their way. She asked me to stay on the line. I remember pacing back and forth, clutching the phone, staring through my window at Tom's house. No movement, no sound. Then, about 5 minutes later, I heard sirens. 2 police cars pulled up. The officers went inside. And when they came out, their faces told me everything I needed to know. They carried out a woman I'd never seen before, pale, shaking, wrapped in a blanket. And behind her, Tom, in handcuffs. He looked straight at me as they put him in the car. No anger. Just relief. And that's when I realized, maybe that note wasn't a threat. Maybe it was a warning. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tom's face, not angry, not afraid, but exhausted, like a man who had carried too much for too long. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. The troll cars had been parked outside Tom's house all night. The local news van showed up just after sunrise. I watched through my blinds as they filmed, microphones in hand, talking to anyone who would speak. Lauren called again. "What happened, Emily?" "They said your neighbor got arrested." I hesitated. "Yeah, Tom. I don't know the whole story. But there was a woman. They took her out last night." "What woman?" she asked. "I've never seen her before," I said softly. She looked terrified. There was a long pause on the line before Lauren whispered, "Do you think she was the one who wrote that note?" The thought had crossed my mind, but I wasn't ready to admit it out loud. "I don't know," I said finally. "But whoever it was, they saved my life." A few hours later, a detective came by to take my statement. His name was Detective Harris, mid-50s, calm but sharp-eyed. He asked me to walk him through everything that had happened, the note, Tom's reaction, what I saw in the house. When I mentioned the map with circles around the homes, his face tightened. "You're sure you saw that?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. My house was one of them." He sighed, took a note, and said quietly, "You might have been lucky, Miss Carter." That's when I realized I'd never actually heard the woman scream, or seen any violence, just silence. And yet, there was a heaviness in the air that told me something terrible had been building for a long time. Later that afternoon, the police tape came down. But I couldn't bring myself to look at Tom's house again. At around 5 p.m., my phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Miss Carter? This is Detective Harris. I thought you should know. Your neighbor isn't denying anything." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He exhaled heavily. "He says he left the note. He says he was trying to warn you." "Warn me? About what?" There was a pause on the line. "About the woman. Her name's Megan Collins. She'd been staying there for weeks, hiding. He claims she wasn't supposed to be there at all." I felt my stomach twist. Hiding from who? But the detective didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, from her husband. And that's when it hit me, the way Tom's house always looked closed off. The nights I'd heard muffled voices. The empty truck in his driveway. It wasn't random. It was all connected. Tom wasn't the danger. He was caught in it. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman, Megan. Who she was, what she'd been through, and why she'd been at Tom's house. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. I peeked through the peephole and froze. It was her. She looked fragile, standing there in an oversized hoodie, her hair pulled back, eyes sunken from exhaustion. I opened the door slowly. "Megan?" She nodded. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." She sat at my kitchen table, holding a mug of tea I'd made her, hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "Tom didn't hurt me," she said. "He was trying to help." She told me she'd met Tom at a construction site a few months earlier. He was kind to her, never asked questions. When she showed up at his house one night with a bruised lip and a black eye, he didn't hesitate, he let her in. Her husband, she said, was violent, controlling, dangerous. She'd tried to leave before, but he always found her. This time, she ran with nothing but her phone and her wallet. Tom hid her in his basement for weeks while she figured out what to do next. I listened, my chest tightening with every word. "But why the note?" I asked. "Why tell me to leave?" She swallowed hard. "Because he found me again. Last night, Tom saw him parked down the street, watching the house. He said if he came back in the morning, he'd kill both of us." I froze. "You mean, he was here, in our neighborhood?" She nodded. "He must have been. Tom told me to pack and go, but I couldn't. I was terrified. He said he'd distract him if he showed up again." I stared at her, speechless. "So, Tom wrote that note to warn me. Because he didn't want anyone else getting hurt," she whispered. There was a long silence, only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Then I asked quietly, "What happened after the police came?" Her eyes welled up. "He told them he kidnapped me, to protect me. He knew if he said the truth, my husband would find me again." She looked down at her hands. "He took the blame so I could disappear." And that's when I realized, the man I'd feared, was the one who saved both our lives. The news spread fast. By evening, Tom's name was everywhere. Local man arrested after harboring missing woman. The story twisted in 100 ways online. Some called him a hero, others called him unstable. I sat on my couch, watching his face flash across the screen, and felt sick. Because I knew neither headline told the truth. The anchor said Tom had been charged with obstruction of justice. That Megan was safe and receiving support. But I knew how the system worked. Safety was a fragile word. Lauren texted, "You okay?" I typed back, "Yeah, just tired." But that wasn't true. I hadn't eaten all day. I kept replaying that moment, the sound of paper against my door, that single sentence that saved my life. When I stepped outside the next morning, the street was quiet again. No reporters, no police tape, just the echo of everything that had happened. Across the road, Tom's house was dark. His truck was gone. The front door sealed. A few neighbors were gathered by the mailbox, whispering like they always did. I caught fragments. "Crazy guy, poor woman," always seemed off. They didn't know what I knew. Tom wasn't crazy. He was human, scared, lonely, and trying to do one good thing in a world that rarely forgives good men who act the wrong way. That afternoon, Detective Harris called again. "We're wrapping up, Miss Carter. I just wanted to thank you for cooperating." I hesitated before asking, "Will Tom be okay?" He sighed. "That depends. He's not denying what he did, but it's complicated. The DA might consider the circumstances. I wanted to ask about Megan, but I didn't. Something told me I shouldn't. After the call, I went to the kitchen, pulled that crumpled note from the drawer, and read it again. Get out of here if you want to live. Those words had sounded like a threat when I first read them. But now, they were something else entirely, a promise. A few nights later, I found myself unable to sleep again. I sat by the window, staring at the house across the street, and whispered to the empty air, "You did the right thing, Tom. I know you did." The streetlight flickered once, then held steady. 3 weeks passed before I saw Megan again. It was a cold Tuesday morning when she showed up, standing by my porch with a suitcase and a soft smile. Her hair was cut shorter, and her eyes looked clearer, calmer. "Hey," I said, stepping outside. "Hey," she replied. "Can I come in for a minute?" She'd been moved to a women's shelter upstate, she explained, but came back to town to testify. She wanted to thank me, not because I'd done anything extraordinary, but because I'd listened. She placed an envelope on my table. Inside was a short letter written in Tom's handwriting. It wasn't long, barely half a page, but every word carried weight. "Emily, if you're reading this, things probably didn't go the way I hoped. I just want you to know, I'm not sorry for helping her. Sometimes you don't get to choose what the right thing looks like, you just know when it's wrong to walk away. Thank you for not turning your back that night. Tell her she deserves peace. Tom." By the time I looked up, Megan was crying silently. "I didn't get to say goodbye," she whispered. "He told me to run, and I did." I reached for her hand and said, "He'd want you to keep running, not from fear, but toward something better." She nodded, wiping her tears. Then she smiled, a fragile, beautiful smile, and said, "You know, he never once called me by my real name. He always called me Grace. Said it suited me better." That moment broke something open in me. Grace. It wasn't just her name, it was what Tom had given her. Before she left, she turned to me and said softly, "He said you reminded him of his sister. Said you still believed people could change." When she was gone, I stood by the window again, watching her walk down the street toward the bus stop. The same street that had almost been our last. And I realized something I hadn't before. You never really know what someone's fighting for, or what they're hiding from, until it's too late to ask. Tom's house was still empty, but that night, for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of it. I felt grateful. After Megan left, I must have read Tom's letter 100 times. It sat on my nightstand, folded neatly, the edges soft from my fingers tracing every word. Sometimes I'd pick it up in the middle of the night, half asleep, and whisper it out loud, like maybe if I said it enough, I'd understand why it hurt so much. A few days later, I got another envelope in the mail, this one from the county courthouse. It was an official notice, State versus Thomas L. Green, hearing scheduled. Seeing his full name printed like that broke something in me. He wasn't just Tom anymore. He was a case file. A headline. Evidence. I thought about going, about sitting quietly in the back of that courtroom just so he'd see one face that wasn't judging him. But when the day came, I couldn't. I stood by my window instead, watching the rain hit the glass, and said a silent prayer. Later that afternoon, Lauren dropped by with coffee. She didn't say much at first. Just handed me the cup and looked around my quiet house. "I heard about the trial," she finally said. "You holding up okay?" I nodded, though my voice caught a little. "Yeah. I just keep thinking, what if he hadn't warned me that night?" Lauren sighed. "Then maybe you wouldn't be here to ask that question." She was right. The world kept moving on. The neighbors went back to gossiping about football games and garbage schedules, like nothing had happened. But for me, the air on our street still carried that memory, the smell of wet pavement, the echo of sirens, the sound of that note hitting the floor. That night, I took the letter, put it back in its envelope, and tucked it behind the photo of my parents. I don't know why. Maybe because both things reminded me that sometimes good people don't get happy endings. Before I went to bed, I looked out at Tom's dark, empty house and whispered, "You didn't fail, Tom. You just cared in the wrong world." The porch light across the street flickered once, the same way it had that night, and then went dark again. A month later, I finally learned what happened to him. I got a call from Detective Harris. His voice was quieter this time, almost kind. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I thought you'd want to know. The court reduced Tom's sentence. They considered what he did an act of protection. He's being transferred to a minimum security facility upstate." I didn't know whether to feel relief or heartbreak. "Did he say anything?" I asked. There was a pause. Then Harris said, "Yeah. He asked if we could make sure you knew he was sorry about the scare that night. Said he never meant to drag you into it, but he was glad you listened." Glad I listened. That line hit harder than I expected. After the call, I went for a walk, same road, same houses, same evening light. Everything looked normal again. But I wasn't the same. Every window I passed, I found myself wondering, how many stories hide behind closed doors? How many people are fighting silent battles no one ever notices until it's too late? I ended up at the small diner on Oak Street, the one Tom used to sit at with his black coffee and old paperback novels. The waitress still remembered him. When she saw me, she said, "You're the lady from across the street, right? He used to talk about you. Said you were one of the few decent ones." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah," I said softly. "He was one of the good ones too." When I got home that night, I wrote him a letter. I don't even know if it would reach him, but it felt right to try. "Tom, you said sometimes the right thing doesn't look right. I think I finally understand that now. You didn't just save her. You saved me too, from becoming someone who looks away." The street's quiet again. The air's softer. Maybe peace doesn't mean forgetting, maybe it means remembering differently. Wherever you are, I hope you found that peace, Emily. I sealed the envelope and set it by the window. The moonlight caught the edge, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, low, calm, steady. "Get out of here if you want to live." But this time, it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like grace. 3 months passed before I finally got the courage to see him. The prison was 2 hours north, surrounded by hills, quiet and far from everything. I almost turned around twice on the way there, but something in me said I owed it to him, and to myself, to close the story properly. When I checked in at the visitor desk, the guard looked at my ID and nodded toward the windowed room. "Green's a quiet one," he said. "Reads a lot. Keeps to himself." That sounded like Tom. He came in a few minutes later, thinner, maybe a little older, but still with that calm, watchful look in his eyes. For a moment, we just stared at each other through the glass. Then he smiled, small, almost apologetic. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again," he said through the phone. "I almost didn't come," I admitted. "But I got your message. About being glad I listened." He nodded slowly. "That night, I didn't mean to scare you. But I knew things were about to go bad. I couldn't let you get caught in it." I studied his face. "Did you ever think about running?" "Every day," he said, voice steady. "But sometimes you stop running and start facing things. Even if you lose." There was a silence, the kind that fills every corner of a room. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Was it true, Tom, what they said, about what you did to protect that woman?" He met my eyes. I stopped something that shouldn't have happened. That's all. The rest, people make up what helps them sleep. And somehow, I believed him. Before I left, I said softly, I still have your letter. He smiled again, almost proud. Then keep it. Words last longer than people do. I walked out of that building feeling both heavier and lighter at the same time. The wind was sharp, the air clean. For the first time in months, I could breathe without fear sitting on my chest. That night, I slept with my window open. And when the wind moved through the curtains, it didn't sound like sirens anymore. It sounded like peace. A year later, I still live on Maple Lane. The houses look the same, white fences, trimmed lawns, porch lights glowing at dusk, but I see it all differently now. When new neighbors move in, they wave politely and ask about the community. I tell them it's quiet, kind of sleepy, but full of stories no one ever talks about. Sometimes I still find myself looking out the window at Tom's old house. It's been sold now, young couple, baby on the way. They painted the porch blue and planted roses along the fence. One morning, the husband waved to me from the yard and shouted, "You've got a great neighborhood here." I smiled back. "Yeah," I said softly. "We do." What I didn't tell him is that every neighborhood, even the peaceful ones, hides its share of heartbreak and heroes. One afternoon, I got a small envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single folded paper. It was Tom's handwriting. I knew it instantly. "Emily, I don't know if this will reach you. I've been writing a lot lately, it helps. You once said I saved your life that night, but truth is, you saved mine too. You reminded me that decency still exists, even when the world forgets how to show it. If you ever wonder whether you did enough, you did. You listened, and that's more than most people ever do. Be well, Tom." I sat there for a long time, just holding that letter, the sunlight warming the paper. In that moment, I realized something. Survival isn't always about running or fighting. Sometimes it's about hearing the warning when it comes, even when it doesn't make sense. Sometimes, get out of here if you want to live isn't about escaping danger. It's about stepping out of ignorance, out of indifference, out of the silence that keeps us blind. Tom's words didn't just save me from a tragedy that night, they changed the way I see the world. Now, when I pass someone who looks tired or scared, I don't look away. I ask if they're okay. I listen. Because that's what Tom taught me, that sometimes, the smallest act of awareness can save a life. The roses across the street bloom every spring now. And when the wind moves through them just right, it sounds almost like a whisper, low, steady, familiar. Get out of here if you want to live. And I do. I live.